Well, joining me now from Tehran is Iranian Affairs analyst Seyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. In Ballantrae, Scotland, we have Struan Stevenson. He's a former member of the European Parliament, where he was the president of the Friends of a Free Iran Intergroup. He was at the conference hosted by the MEK in Paris. And with me here in the studio is journalist Borzou Daragahi. He's a contributor to Foreign Policy and the Atlantic, covering the Middle East and North Africa. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Before I get into who done it or who tried to do it, I want to kind of lay a foundation in a little bit with this discussion first. Borzou, let me start with you. Is MEK a terrorist group?
I mean, I'm a journalist. I try not to use that word. I would describe them as a potentially dangerous, cult-like organization that is extremely mendacious, extremely dishonest, and rather unliked by many Iranians. They do have their supporters in the diaspora and inside Iran. I've seen them described as Iran's Khmer Rouge. I would not necessarily, as both a journalist and a kind of a Iranian American myself, I would not necessarily disagree with that assessment.
Right. Okay. Seyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm. Is MEK a terrorist organization?
Well, sure. You know, they started their life a few years before the revolution through a blending of Marxism and Islamism, but they were never accepted by religious leaders, including Iran's revolution leader, former revolution leader Ayatollah Khomeini, because they embarked on armed struggle and terrorist operations that included civilian toll, and also they killed 6 Americans. Americans were seen as enemies those days, before the revolution, of course, and after. But Imam Khomeini never accepted this group because he believed that terrorist operations are banned, and he never endorsed their operation. After the revolution, they started armed insurgency in Iran. They have killed 17,000 Iranian civilians and officials, including 72 parliament members, a president, a prime minister, head of the judiciary, and many normal citizens who just because they looked like fervent supporters of the Islamic Republic. Just one more sentence. On a single day, when they lost the armed insurgency in order to create horror among the public, they were ordered to take out to the streets and kill anyone who looks like a supporter of the Islamic Republic. On that day, at 2:00 p.m., they killed anyone that they saw who had grown beard and wearing a mustache, and they killed jobless people, students, teachers, greengrocers, butchers, normal citizens. Hundreds of people were killed. There are some sites that you may see those sites, the names of the victims that have been killed by this terrorist cult in Iran, and they are sure a terrorist organization by every definition.
Okay. And that's great. And my apologies for interrupting, but there is a delay as well, and I'm going to have to interrupt you from time to time. My apologies in advance. I want to keep this moving on. Struan Stevenson. So we've heard from both guests. On the one hand, you have Borzou not going so far as to say they are a terror group, but calling them mendacious, potentially dangerous, cult-like, dishonest. We have the view from Tehran. They've killed 17,000 civilians. They killed a prime minister. They killed a president. What on earth were you doing at their rally then?
Yeah, you know, I've heard all these allegations before. The absurdity of saying things like they are almost like the Iranian version of the Khmer Rouge. You know, I really have to question the veracity of any journalist that could say such a thing. I've been supporting this organization for 15 years. I've met them many times before in the European Parliament, in many different fora around the world. Why do you think thousands of parliamentarians, elected parliamentarians in Europe, many former prime ministers, many leaders, many former foreign ministers, people like Rudy Giuliani, Newt Gingrich, why do you think we all support them?
Is it because
we know
enemy of my enemy is my friend?
We know their honesty, we know they're genuine, we know they're being horribly oppressed and persecuted by the murderous medieval regime.
Is it possible? Just before we move on to the potential, the bomb plot, right? Let me ask you a very simple question. Is it because the enemy of my enemy is my friend? You don't like the Iranian regime. Yes, the Iranian regime does horrible things, But that doesn't mean you just support whoever stands up against them, right? The MEK crimes are a fact.
It is because they are the main democratic opposition. They are led by a woman. They are offering a 10-point manifesto that I myself, as a European, would be proud to stand for election on their manifesto platform. And that, of course, is why Khamenei and the Ayatollahs hate them. They hate the fact that they have an opposition movement led by a woman who are offering democracy, freedom, and justice to the people of Iran.
Okay, and good to get that perspective.
Something that has been absent for 40 years.
Okay, good to get that perspective. Now, Borzou, as I move this on a little bit, I'm going to ask you to fold in your response to Struan into the answer about whether they actually might have tried to bomb themselves as a false flag, as the Iranians say, or the Iranian government might have tried to blow them up.
Well, I mean, I really am, not surprised. I know that the MEK have their supporters abroad. I'm not sure where this gentleman is coming from. I would never question his integrity and so on. I'm sure he's a true believer for honest reasons. But many of the other supporters are paid. Many of the people that he listed, former Mayor Giuliani, they're paid to support the MEK. And that's their decision to advocate for this group. They get money for that. As for the issue of this alleged bomb plot, I mean, it's not out of line with what the kinds of things that the regime has done in the past. Yes, in many respects, the MEK is a kind of irrelevant organization inside Iran, but they have done one thing that has gotten the ire of the Iranian government, and that is their alleged participation in these plots to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists.
Right.
And you could see, and we're dealing in the realm of like sort of clandestine black ops and so on. There's no evidence to this effect, but you could see certain people inside the regime feeling like they need to respond to these assassinations. And feeling they need to make the MEK pay a price. And in recent years, we've also seen a pattern of more and more adventurism on the part of the Iranian regime, using diplomatic outposts as a tool to expand their power and so on. You've seen, I've heard complaints from former and current Iranian diplomats that IRGC folks are coming into their turf and taking over and so on. So one could imagine that certain rogue elements in the Iranian security
might not have come from the top, right? Okay, so that's interesting. So Mostafa Khoshcheshm, I know that you and Borzou probably largely agree when it comes to whether the MEK is an unhealthy organization, but you're probably going to disagree on this. You mentioned a litany of crimes that the MEK committed and are alleged to have committed. And then we also see we have an MEP here, and for a former MEP, we have a bunch of people in the West who have been won over, seduced by MEK and supporting their cause. Doesn't that give the Iranian regime complete motive to crush them however they can? Because these guys not only did terrible things, but they're winning over all these Westerners. Doesn't that suggest that maybe the Iranian regime, or at least some from within it, tried to do this rally harm?
Well, I answer your question fast. Before that, I would like to raise a question for your friend, the MP, who's a fervent supporter of MKO. Maybe he needs to present some explanations why the EU and Britain blacklisted, as well as the US, all blacklisted MKO, MEK, whatever they are called. They have hundreds of names, as a terrorist organization before 2011, and after 2011 and 2012, when Obama started and Hillary Clinton started, damaging Iran's reputation for justifying their sanctions and rallying international support for their sanctions against Iran, they took them off the blacklist. But in response to your question, not that because I'm an Iranian, even many Iranians abroad that are opposition of the Islamic Republic, monarchists, also the Marxists, communists, seculars, anyone, go ask them. Many of them detest this group and consider them as a terrorist organization. Now, a group that has lost thousands of members, its members have decreased from 20,000 to a few thousand. They are old. And even in that last gathering, you could see that half of the hall was filled with some East European tourists who had come there as tourists for 3-day stay in there. In return for food and accommodation, they paid 20 euros, and they were these are the pictures that have been released by the Western media outlets, of course, that they were lying at the end rows of the hall. Such a group that's useless, actually, and has proved a full defeat for the Western policies. Why should Iran take the risk to pay the costs for such an operation on the day that President Rouhani is in Europe and is trying to save the nuclear deal?
Is it possible, Mr. Khoshcheshm, but Mr. Khoshcheshm, is it possible that within the government, maybe from the IRGC, I don't know, but is it possible that there might have been rogue elements who don't like the fact that President Rouhani wants to save the deal? They don't like the fact that Iran is engaging with the Europeans, and maybe they wanted to do something about it. Is that plausible?
No, not at all. You could see that when President Rouhani was in Europe, he said he issued a tacit warning saying that Iran would do a number of things if it couldn't, export oil. Right after that, top Iranian generals all supported this policy, not just this policy, but they said, and that's the statement. The head of the IRGC, the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, and other top generals have stated that they support him in whatever policy that he wants to adopt. On the other hand, Iran is an integrated government and ruling system. The Islamic Republic is not ruled by separate people. There is a ruling system in here. There are policies. Iran has not done that for sure. Why should Iran embark on a terrorist operation like this when it has complied with all its duties and responsibilities under the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and it's waiting for the Europeans to comply and to, with their undertakings and hold up their end of the bargain? Why should Iran embark on such an operation that's all costs?
Okay. Let me ask you, Mr. Stevenson, to respond to a tweet from Iran's Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif. He says, how convenient, just as we embark on a presidential visit to Europe, an alleged Iranian operation and its plotters arrested. Iran unequivocally condemns all violence and terror anywhere and is ready to work with all concerned to uncover what is a sinister false flag ploy. That's Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. Struan Stevenson, your response to that tweet is what?
Well, first of all, let me say to your Turkish audience that the Iranians have some previous record of this, because Manashar Mottaki, when he was the Iranian ambassador to Turkey, he was actually expelled by the Turkish government in 1988 when one of his embassy cars was stopped at the border, and a prisoner was found tied up in the trunk of the car, who then exposed the fact that he had been held with several other MEK prisoners in a dungeon underneath the Iranian embassy in Ankara, where they had been tortured, and admitted that they were being taken back for execution to Iran. So Mottaki was expelled, and what did the Iranians do? They appointed him later as their foreign minister. A known murderer and a criminal became their foreign minister. Now, this is par for the course with the Iranians because, of course, they have a long track record of murdering their opponents in Turkey, in Europe, and elsewhere. Bomb plots like the one that was attempted last week, where the main culprit was a diplomat in the Vienna embassy. Mr. Assadi, is well known as the MIS, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security from Iran, their Austrian station chief. He, now according to the federal prosecutor from Belgium, was known to have handed the explosives over to the two arrested terrorists in the car in Luxembourg. And, you know, this is unequivocal. It is evidence not from me, not from a journalist, it's from the federal prosecutor. This is a terrorist regime, a gangster regime, who quite certainly go out, all out, to murder their
Right.
their opposition.
Okay.
You know,
Yep. Borzou.
I wouldn't put it past the MEK or whatever, MKO, whatever, PMOI, to do something like this. They are also a pretty murderous organization. But at this point, when you look at the people who are making these allegations about the bomb plot, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, these are the countries that are involved in this investigation, and they're making these allegations, they're putting this together. These are countries that have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to stir up things with Iran right now. I think that they're doing this despite what their political and foreign policy interests are. So I don't see this. It makes it very unlikely that this is a false flag operation, so to speak. It's either a rogue operation, very possibly, or something that there was planned from the regime.
And so, Borzou, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If it's a false flag, you have to, really prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. As you mentioned, the Austrians, the Belgians, the French, and the Germans, all at the moment, not directly, but looking into it, and the suggestion being that the Iranian government wanted to take out this rally. If that is the case, if there's proof that this came from Tehran, what would that mean for Iran and the Europeans?
It makes it tougher for the Europeans to uphold the JCPOA and to make this thing work. Already there's a lot of disagreements about the nuclear deal, and Iranians saying that the proposal submitted by the Europeans is not enough, Europeans saying maybe we can't do much better. If Iran wanted to make this issue go away, it could do one thing, is say, remove the diplomatic immunity of this guy, Asadullah. And it has not done that. In fact, it has demanded that he be handed over and offered diplomatic immunity and allowed to depart from the EU. And that doesn't look good. It's not a good look for the Iranians.
Right. Okay. So very finally, Seyed Mostafa Khoshcheshm, if the Iranians are completely transparent about this, why not let justice take its course? If you trust the Germans, if you trust the Europeans, the Austrians and so forth, remove the diplomatic immunity of Asadullah Assadi and let justice take its course. Why not?
Okay, let me tell you, the Israelis say that they first fed the security officials in Europe with this plot, and we know that the Israelis are arch enemies of the Islamic Republic. In the last case, under the nuclear deal several years ago, the MKO and Israelis started some so-called laptop documents. They presented it to the German authorities. German authorities have confessed in interviews with Garrett Porter, a very well-known investigative journalist who's American, by the way, that at the first look that they had at these documents, they laughed and they gave it back to the MKO. A year later, they received the same documents from Americans and they never rejected. And the head of the German security says in that interview, in the book, that we were astonished how come our American counterparts have accepted this to be genuine. But they built up on that those alleged documents and presented the PMD, or possible military dimension case, that was eventually resolved on the nuclear case that was a bargaining chip to receive concessions from Iran. But at the end of the day, everyone confessed that Iran has not done any kind of such activities. When they want to justify sanctions and pressures against Iran, this happened under Obama, they raised so many plots like this in order to damage Iran's reputation, to justify their pressures, also to increase the costs for anyone who wants to back up Iran on the international scene, like the Chinese and the Russians. And also, in order to blacklist the IRGC, Trump has long been trying to blacklist them as a terrorist organization. Now he is paving the ground for that. Also, they are changing the picture of the MKO as a terrorist organization to the victim of terrorism through such allegations. One last thing. The last time Obama did the same thing, they claimed that IRGC wanted to assassinate Adel al-Jubair, the Saudi envoy, but after they ratify a UN General Assembly resolution that was non-binding against Iran, they said that the only witness in that case was a mentally ill person and sent him to asylum. The case was dismissed completely, but a resolution, UN resolution against Iran, remained in place. So this is completely a false flag operation, and the goals are clearly known.
Okay, I really have to wrap now. I know Struan and Borzou are both chomping at the bit to jump in, but we're completely out of time now.
No,
I'd love to.
Actually, I'm good.
Okay, you're good. Okay. So listen, we'll have you back on the show in the future, all of you, and I thank you for joining us. Borzou, Struan, and Mostafa Khoshcheshm. Thanks again for joining us here on the Newsmakers.